And of course, we know our democracy has never been perfect. Our founding documents aspired to equality and justice, goals that are lofty, but I think it's fair to say that we have struggled at times throughout our history to reach. We haven't always lived up to our democratic potential, despite the 2 steps forward, 1 step back nature of the progress we've made over these 2.5 centuries. What we're facing today, though, is really unique in that long annal of American democracy. Let me give you 2 data points in addition to what my colleagues have shared. 64% of Americans today believe that our democracy is failing. And about 1 in 5 Americans now believe violence is sometimes justified to protect democracy or American values. That is not something we have seen in the modern history of American democracy. And it's sobering. But does it mean that the 3 of us or our almost 50 colleagues or the thousands in the pro-democracy community are pessimistic? The people who work on this all day long, every day? No, we are not. Because the challenge may be profound, but democracy isn't going down without a fight. And indeed, we believe it's not going down at all. Why? Why do we think that? We're optimistic by our natures. As part of it, I spoke to the propaganda and persuasion class today. And the very end, it was a wonderful. Lauren came with me. Didn't we have a great time, Lauren? The class was superb. You can be so proud. Everyone in this room who is associated with Penn State can be so proud of the students, the undergraduates in that class, and the brilliant back and forth we had. But I confessed one of the characteristics of propaganda. I prepared, I got the syllabus and the readings, and one of the characteristics of propaganda is bias. And I tried to engage in persuasion, but at the end, I confessed my methodological bias towards optimism, because the best you can do to be persuasion and not propaganda is to admit your biases when you come into the conversation. But it's not just my tendency, our tendency towards optimism. It's the evidence. We get to work with those state and local election officials every day, the people who are actually on the front lines of our democracy. And they inspire us to keep going, and each one of them is a living data point about why our democracy will succeed. States United is, moreover, proof, the 50 of us, our wonderful colleagues, and we're just one in a constellation of civil society organizations that have taken up this cause. Protecting our democracy is an all-hands-on-deck effort, and it's an honor to be a part of it. Now, let me tell you a little bit about our approach at States United, because we may be optimistic, but we don't leave those good outcomes to chance. To paraphrase the saying, I find the harder we work, the luckier we get. So we heard from Governor Whitman about 2 founding principles of our organization: that democracy will be saved in the states, and that the work, the hard and intense and laborious, challenging, often fun, rewarding work, must be bipartisan. And that's a joy that we have in working together across the aisle, all across the country. Here's how we think about that work. We've organized it around 4 pillars, 4 places where we really saw a gap that needed filling. And there you have them. Larger than life. election protection, political violence prevention, truth in elections, and accountability. Let me explain a little bit about what those mean to us. And you should understand that we have now have 2 years of living into the meaning of these 4 areas of work under our belt. First, protecting elections. This is about the freedom to vote, the cornerstone of our democracy, really the foundation of the political legitimacy of the American Republic. It's the freedom that undergirds and protects all of the other freedoms that have made America, made the United States a beacon to the world, with all of our imperfections. As we point out whenever we get the chance, no matter what issues you care about, free and fair elections must come first. So we work with the states to develop legal and policy strategies to protect the vote. Let me give you an example. In Pennsylvania, right here in Pennsylvania, we defended a bipartisan law that was passed in 2019 permitting no excuse absentee voting by mail. It was challenged in court, and we worked with the Secretary of the Commonwealth to defend the law. In August, the cause of democracy and free and fair voting won. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court upheld the law as constitutional. Sadly, that's not the end of it. Virtually the same people who lost in August are already back in court trying to strike down the law. Thankfully, not for this election. So the work goes on. Second, preventing political violence. For elections to be free and fair, they must be safe. And the people who run them have to be safe as well. So we do a lot of work at States United to help make sure that voters, poll workers, election officials, and the democratic process itself are all safe. When we talk about political violence in this country, naturally and tragically, we now think about the first non-peaceful transition of power in the long and storied history of the United States, January 6th. But we try to remind people that the insurrection that exploded into view on January 6th began long before that day, and that it didn't end there. In the 2 years since the attack, we've seen elevated levels of hate and threats of violence. The attempted coup, as it's been described by a federal judge in California, unfortunately has only metastasized. And it's being fueled, as Joanna told you, by lies and conspiracy theories. So we have to protect our elections, our election officials, our election workers, and our voters. Law enforcement has a key role to play in all that. But how should we think about that role of law enforcement? At States United, we try to make sure that law enforcement is in deep conversation with elected officials, election officials, and community groups about how best to protect elections. We help strengthen those relationships long before the election itself, and we keep those conversations going long after the election. States United saw a unique need here, and we are unique in our singular focus on this connection. And I'll mention just a few of the ways we do that. Our state officials deserve all of the help that we can give them on this. So we help train them on how to monitor threats, how and when to respond, and when they should call in law enforcement. We equip state and local officials with guidance on how to handle disruptions at the polls and keep voters safe. We make sure that those officials and law enforcement agencies understand the rights and limitations of poll observers at polling places, and we also help law enforcement agencies combat extremism in their own ranks, always consistent with the First Amendment and the highest traditions of American rule of law and constitutionalism. We were so proud of Joanna and the team who just went to the largest annual law enforcement conference in the United States, 15,000 law enforcement, 2,000 more signed up since I last discussed Joanna. With Joanna, and Joanna and the team presented in this very, very important lane that really sprang up, unfortunately, around the 2020 election, and that we're so privileged to now help occupy and make run. It is safe to vote in the United States, and we're honored to help keep it that way. Third, truth in elections. We want our elections to be free, fair, safe, but also honest. Voters need reliable information. And as Joanna told you, we know that lies about our elections, disinformation, is driving so much of the problem here. So we work with our state and local partners every day to help them detect the lies that voters are seeing in their states, and also on which counter messages are most important in fighting them. It's kind of an early warning system for disinformation narratives. And I hesitated in the prior sentence because the truth is, it's not just every day. We have a very powerful anti-disinformation truth team, and they're working every minute of every day because that's what you have to do to deal with the disinformation. It's constantly flowing, so the truth must flow even more vigorously. I don't need to tell you about the big lie. You know about that already, but just as important are all the big little lies downstream. Take 2,000 Mules, for example. That's a film that pushes lies about the use of ballot drop boxes. It has been thoroughly taken apart and discredited by independent fact checkers. But the former president and his allies, the members of the election denial movement that he leads, are using it anyhow as supposed evidence of fraud. And these aren't harmless flights of fancy. These poisonous ideas are what triggered the violence of January 6th and what are used now in the next iteration of the election denial movement to justify regressive voting laws and to change the rules of our elections. So we have to fight disinformation and get truthful election information into the public. And fourth, finally, perhaps nearest and dearest to my heart, accountability. I saved this for last because it means so much to me personally. People must be held accountable when they step outside the bounds of the rule of law that is the animating principle of American democracy. There have to be consequences for breaking the rules or rule-breaking flourishes. Let's start with January 6th. States United was so proud to work with the D.C. Attorney General, Karl Racine, to sue the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and more than 36 members of those two organizations. Attorney General Racine is seeking to recover damages for the harms that were caused by those insurrectionists. And it was the first effort, the very first effort, by a governmental entity anywhere in the United States to hold individuals and organizations responsible in civil court for their role in planning and carrying out the attack that day. So we're very proud of that. We're also proud to push for accountability in the legal profession, two out of the three of us occupy, and the third teases the other two about mercilessly. Lawyers take an oath. We swear to uphold the Constitution. We have a duty to follow the rules of legal ethics and to protect the rule of law. And that includes upholding our democracy. Lawyers helped protect democracy in 2020, and they're doing it again now. But I'm sorry to tell you that there were also some lawyers on the other side, and they helped trigger this democracy crisis and are still, many of them, attempting to push it forward. So at States United, we pursue consequences for lawyers who have violated their ethical duties in attempts to undermine our democracy. John Eastman is one example. His name was all over Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election. He was one of the legal masterminds of that effort. And thanks to the January 6th committee, we've learned that his role was even more extensive than we previously knew. He was just in the news again yesterday. More of his emails were released, providing evidence in black and white that the former president knew when he signed legal papers that his claims about the election were not true. A federal judge in California has called the efforts to overturn the 2020 election a coup in search of a legal theory. And John Eastman was one of the leaders of attempting to provide that legal theory. We wrote memos pointing this out, and Eastman himself was a principal purveyor. We now have his emails, his documentation, a great deal of other information about what Eastman did, culminating in pressuring Mike Pence to betray his constitutional duty in Congress on January 6th and throw out lawful electoral votes. Eastman even represented Trump in a frivolous lawsuit at the Supreme Court. He spoke at the insurrection tailgate, the Stop the Steal rally on January 6th, and he and Rudy Giuliani met with hundreds of state legislators to push this forward. All of this with the aim of overturning the election. No one is above the law. And that is why we filed a complaint demonstrating that the same should be true of lawyers, such as John Eastman. We filed a bar complaint against him in California. It was supported by 25 bipartisan signatories, including 5 former judges. And what do you know? The state bar took the rare step in California of announcing that Eastman is now under investigation. And we've done much, much more work regarding Eastman and other lawyers in this regard. That's accountability. And many others are doing their parts as well, of course. The January 6th committee, the determined Fulton County, Georgia prosecutor, Fani Willis, and we try to help. For example, with Fani Willis's investigation, we filed an amicus brief arguing to the court that Senator Lindsey Graham needed to testify. And literally, while we were here giving our remarks, the 11th Circuit just accepted our brief, adopted our arguments, and ordered that there will be no further stay of Senator Graham's subpoena. That happened while we were on stage today. You may want to save your applause until after he loses his appeal to the United States Supreme Court, but I'll take it. So we are a nation of laws, and the laws do not apply themselves. Without accountability, without taking action, they're just words on paper. So we're going to continue to do all we can at States United to make sure there are consequences for those who seek to undermine our democracy. So that's our game plan. The election deniers have their playbook, and we have ours. Protect elections, prevent political violence, promote the truth about elections, and always, always push for accountability. As I said when I began, I'm an optimist. The good guys and gals won in 2020. The forces of democracy that pro-democracy playbook that we described defeated the attempted insurrection. But it didn't end. The anti-democracy side has kept going, so we have to keep going as well. We have a roadmap. We know how to defend democracy going forward. It's going to take a lot of work. We're going to want everybody's help here, and I'm so grateful to be doing that work with Joanna and Christy. And Christy and I have asked Joanna to say some last few words to you about what comes next. Joanna?
He's moving the medal away from me. Thank you once again to everyone at the McCourtney Institute and here at Penn State. It's really been an honor to be here. We want to save some time for questions if we can. So I just want to close with this. There are two questions people ask me a lot since I took this job. One is, what can I do to help? And the other is, how do you think this is all going to turn out? So I'm going to try to answer those quickly. First, what we can all do. This is my favorite thing to talk about, because the good news is that there's a meaningful role for every single person who's interested in protecting free and fair elections in this country. Most immediately, of course, we can vote. In every election, not just every 2 years or every 4 years, especially on November 8th. We can support pro-democracy candidates across the political spectrum and up and down the ballot. We can get educated. We can learn about the candidates and where they stand on democracy. We have a tracker at our website, statesunitedDemocracy.org. We can get behind the truth. We can limit the spread of lies and conspiracies on social media, in our families, in our communities. We can get engaged, thank an election official, praise bipartisan courage when you see it, volunteer to be a poll worker. After all, who doesn't love handing out stickers? Better yet, run for a state or local election office yourself. Democracy needs the next generation of leaders and the next and the next. In our schools, we can promote civic education. In our businesses, we can recognize that free markets depend on democratic stability. In our communities, we can protect our election workers. It takes hundreds of thousands of people to put on an election in America. We should have their backs. So there's a lot we can do, but it starts with voting. Democracy is about the will of the people, so express your will. And finally, I get asked, how do you think this will all turn out? And this is where I wish I had a crystal ball or maybe even just an 8-ball. And the answer is nobody knows. But I tell you what we do know. This is a tumultuous time, but the American people believe in democracy. We know people really don't like it when candidates lie about our elections. We know people want a system where elections are free, fair, secure, and accurate. In fact, by an overwhelming majority, we know the American people believe in counting every legal vote and that that's more important than having their preferred candidate win. Think about that. It's the most extraordinary idea about self-government and the most ordinary principle of the American system. I know that the spirit of democracy is renewed every day, every year, every election by an entire brigade of dedicated state and local election officials. And in my job, I have the privilege of working with them across the country every day. They're professionals and they're patriots. Democracy didn't survive in 2020 by luck or by accident. It was saved. And public servants saved it. They followed the law and honored the will of the people. They're the backbone of our democracy. We owe them our gratitude and we owe them our support, and that's why States United exists. I think if we all learned one thing in 2020, it's that we can't take our democracy for granted anymore, and we never will again. Preserving our system will require all of us to get involved, and when you think about it, that's what a democracy is all about. It's why the three of us are committed to the fight and why we have hope for the future.